Are we on the verge of the next property crash? Yes, on the Property Podcast this week, we're not being sensational at all again. I'm Rob B with Rob D, and you're listening to episode 221 of the Property Podcast.
Yes, welcome to the Property Podcast. If you think we're being sensational, well, don't blame us. Blame Moneyweek. We're going to be going through a story that appeared on the cover of a recent edition of Moneyweek and giving our own take on what's in there. They're arguing that we're on the verge of a crash. Are we? Well, we will see. But we'll keep you on tenterhooks a bit longer before you find out if the world is going to come crashing down around you, and extend to you an invitation to come and hang out with us.
Yes, if you've ever thought, what do Rob and Rob do outside the podcast? Well, now's your chance, because we've got an open day to our businesses. You can come and learn about R&P property or yellow lettings. We're not going to talk about it here on the podcast. You can come and visit us and we'll talk about it there. Rob and I will be hosting a day on June 24th. You can get a morning or an afternoon slot. We've recorded this a little in advance, so the tickets may be gone, but you can put your name down on the waiting list. It's only a £5. You get at least one coffee out of that, a few biscuits, so you more than make your money back up with London prices for coffee. And that £5 goes to charity. It's not a profit-making day. It's more of a day to let people know about what we do. We did one last year. The tickets went very, very quickly. They may have already gone, but if you put your name down on the waiting list, if one comes free, you'll be able to get one. And you might be lucky if you rush and go there now to thepropertyhub.net/open day. There may even be a small number left. So go check it out.
Okay, so we look forward to seeing you on the 24th of June, just a few weeks away. No news story this week because the news is happening. You were out voting. Maybe you're on the way to the polling station right now. So today is election day. We'll talk about anything interesting that comes out of that next week. But for now, let's move on to something definitely interesting. And that is our topic of the week. Are we on the verge of the next property crash? So this is, like I said earlier, from a Moneyweek cover story on the 14th of April. Thank you to James Waters. He made us aware of this, and I'm glad that he did because there's lots of interesting stuff for us to get into. So what we're going to do is separate out the article from our opinion. So we're going to start out by running through the argument that the article makes, and then we're going to give our take on it at the end. So let's start with the basic argument. The argument is that house prices are going to fall from their current levels. That's what it's basically saying. It says it in a little bit more of a dramatic way than that.
Just a little bit more dramatic.
A little bit. Okay, you ready for this? Like a vast pyramid scheme, the UK housing market has been defying the reality of low wage growth and productivity and worsening affordability. It also says, when a rocket runs out of fuel, it continues to rise before plunging earthwards. This is where we seem to be now. There you go. Dramatic stuff. So that's the claim. The article then goes on to talk about a number of different factors that back up that opinion. So let's have a quick romp through those, shall we?
Okay, so the credit factors. They say house prices are driven by the availability and price of credit. QE has flooded the system with money and, of course, asset bubbles. And QE is now being wound down and rates will rise at some point. All true. Can't argue with that, Rob. Should we continue?
Let's. So then it moves on to the economic factors. So it says that household savings are at an all-time low and consumer borrowing is at an all-time high, so a rate rise will be a disaster. And it also says that real incomes have been flat since 2007. So take all that together, and it's basically saying that we've had an asset bubble that's been inflated. It's been inflated to a point beyond where it really should be given the economic reality, and at some point that's going to have to come down. It also talks about some demand reasons why it believes that house prices are going to come down.
It says banks are having to stress test borrowers, so credit is tightening, which has already begun. London prices have been boosted by a growing population, which may not last. That is true, but it's not the only thing that's boosted it, far from it, but we'll come to that. Poor affordability is reducing demand for people in their 20s and 30s. Fair enough. Should we continue? Supply factors, Rob.
Yeah, so on the supply side, supply is increasing, the article says. Housing completions are rising, and you're seeing evidence in some places of oversupply. So you're seeing new developments being built that aren't selling. And this is true. There are developments on the south bank of the Thames, and in other places as well, that are struggling to sell. And there are also political factors for why house prices are going to fall. And they're related particularly to landlords because, of course, owner-occupiers, if they want somewhere to live, they'll pretty much get somewhere to live if they can. Landlords can choose whether to invest in property or not. And, of course, we've seen the government turning on buy-to-let. All the changes that we've seen in recent years have made it clear that buy-to-let is not the flavour of the month. That means, the article says, that more landlords will sell, which of course won't affect supply, because when a landlord sells a home to an owner-occupier, the home still exists, but it will cause prices to fall because they'll do it all at once. So basically, everyone gets their tax bill and realise what's going on all at the same time, and everyone sells up, which puts a downward pressure on prices. So having gone through all that, it all sounds pretty scary. Lots of reasons from lots of different angles to support the argument that house prices are higher than perhaps they should be, and they're only going to go in one direction.
So thank you for joining us for the last ever property podcast. We'll be back next week with the Golden Stocks podcast. Until then, bye-bye. Oh, wait, Rob. Wait. There might be a few flaws. Should we have a look?
Well, let's. I can almost sense you trying to hold yourself back, so I feel like maybe I should go first. And
I think you probably should, Rob.
Yeah, okay. So, and I think I'm a little less angry than you are, so maybe this will be a nice lead-in to your bit. I basically don't disagree with any of this long term. The issue is the timing. Everything that it's saying is fair. It's not complete, and that's important, but this is all true, especially, I think, the credit and the economic factors that we talk about at the start. An asset bubble has been stoked up for various reasons, but it's the timing. That's what I disagree with. The argument is that this is going to happen overnight. Now, we know from the property cycle that there is going to be a blow up at some point. And from the cycle, we could take guesses about roughly when it's going to be. But the article seems to be saying that it's going to happen pretty much overnight, and I just don't think it is. Why? Well, one reason is I don't think interest rates are going to rise meaningfully anytime soon. That's because it will be ruinous for so many people when they do. It shouldn't be, but that just points to the underlying weakness of the economy. So they're not going to be allowed to rise because they just can't. So that will be delayed to a point where the economy can sustain it. It also talked about the credit factors, house prices being driven by the availability and price of credit. Yeah, absolutely. But credit is cheap and widely available, and it will continue, I think, to be so. We talked last week about the different parties' housing policies. It's going to be an obsession, whoever gets in for the next government, to increase home ownership for the younger generation. They all want to do that. So we can expect more help to buy type policies. And the effect of that is going to be to pump up prices. They might like to pretend that they can help first-time buyers get on the ladder without increasing prices for everyone, but they can't. There's also the issue of overseas demand that we talked about in the Secret Property Boom episode, which doesn't get a look in here. I think that's a major omission. And a big one, something that we see all the time, is it confuses London with the rest of the country. This happens in article after article. London and the rest of the country in terms of housing are so different. And in the article, they've got a graph that shows how affordability has got worse in the UK, in London and in the north. And their own graph, the graph that they're using to make this argument, shows that in the north, affordability hasn't got any worse since the end of the crash. So if you look at the UK as a whole and you look at London, yeah, okay, you can see the trend. But their own graph shows the weight that London is putting on that. If you take London out of the picture, it's not so much the case. So it's not that I disagree with what's in there, but I disagree with the timing. And I think that it's missed out factors that are going to have a major, major impact on how things are going to pan out over the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, a couple of really big points there, Rob. The overseas demand. 1 in 4 transactions in the UK are from overseas buyers at the moment, which is huge. Huge, absolutely huge, which isn't even touched on at any point. And the one that really grinds my gears is the London thing, like you've said so well, so I won't go on it too much. But when will this London buyers media realise that there is life outside the M25? It just frustrates me. But that's not what frustrates me the most. And the reason why I think it was wise for Rob to go first is that what this magazine is trying to do, and I understand why, is sell copies. And they're doing that by fear. You know, James, who sent this in, has not sent it in because he's laughing at it. He sent it in because he's scared. And there'll be other people who've read this who are scared too. And I think that's really, really, on a low level, unfair. And at another level, a disgrace. Because this could hurt people financially. So let's have a look. Now, Rob's touched on the data, and he's right to, because so much of it is flawed. It's so selective. So they looked at immigration But they looked at it in London rather than the UK as a whole, and they used that as a justification that it's not going up enough to justify the amount of homes being built. They completely forgot to miss out huge chunks of information. So let's get the picture as a whole. In 2014 to 2015, the latest data from the ONS, the Office of National Statistics, it shows that the population grew by 500,000 in the UK, which half of that number was through people living longer. So that 250,000, even if immigration slows, half of that number, 250,000, was from people living longer. We built less than 200,000 homes last year, and we pretty much have every year built way under 200,000 homes since the Second World War. Also, immigration isn't going to come to a grinding halt no matter what happens in the election, because if you look at the countries where people are coming from, number 1 and 2 aren't Europe. Most of the top 5 and top 10 of people coming to the UK are outside of Europe. So it's only going to have a small effect, and they're not going to stop people coming in altogether. So that number may come down slightly, but they're huge increases year on year. Most of it is driven because we just live longer. It claims homes are unaffordable, and absolutely, London, yes. But most of the UK, no, as Rob's pointed out, and the data shows. And we've got a really good podcast, and I think it's probably worth mentioning now, where we looked at all different types of data and ratios, because what happens is people will use some selective data to put an argument together. So we did a podcast where we looked at all the affordability ratios, and we'll link to it in the show notes this week. So I think it's really important you check the show notes out this week, which is at thepropertyhub.net/crash time. That's crash time. Get along and listen to that podcast as well, because you'll see after listening to that, it'll put a lot of this to bed. One of the interesting points, a minor one, housing completions are rising in London. That's right, but there's a lag effect. Remember, you build and then you complete a couple of years later. The amount of work being started today has dropped considerably, understandably, in London. Again, a little bit flawed. Real incomes have been flat since 2007. True. Misses out, though, disposable income, the money that people actually have to spend, has gone up, and quite a bit. But that's because interest rates are low. So, again, selecting different bits of information to put an article together. Basically, this article is a sham. It's just picked out little bits of information to scare and terrify people, to put an argument together that, because the guy who's put it together is obviously reasonably intelligent and knows which data points to pick up on, rather than use a balanced view, which is what we like to do, they've picked a biased view to put a story together that will sell copies. And it will, because we're even talking about it. So, what will happen? Well, London probably will have a drop in prices, and the media will go wild. As we've seen, they are quite London-centric as it is. We've talked about this before. But what's important is the government will do all they can to make Brexit work. Whichever government it is, they'll do all they can. And they will stimulate the economy if needed. I actually expect them to. So where QE has been slowing down, if the economy has even a slight wobble, guess what they're going to do? They're going to open those money taps right back up and start pumping it into the economy. Every time we've had a hint of a wobble, they've just started QE. And they'll do it again and again, because the government can't afford to let Brexit not work. Now, what they're doing is pushing the can down the road. And as Rob said, it's important to point out, we will have a property crash. And we've talked about that a lot. Go and listen to the 18-year property cycle courses. Again, we'll link to those in the show notes. So that's the correction that will happen. But before that correction, I actually feel, and Rob's talked about it before, that with all the things that are happening right now and all the stimulus that's being put into place and the overseas buyers that people aren't talking about, far from going into a crash, actually quite the opposite. We're probably going to a boom. And you could say, oh, your property podcast talking about the boom. But we've preached caution in the past. Then when it's down and people are nervous, that's when we get excited. And that's why we're excited right now. But let's look at the past. Because this isn't the first time we've talked about Moneyweek, and it isn't the first time Moneyweek have predicted a crash. So, Rob, you indulge me with going back through the history books?
Are you feeling all right? Are you sure you're okay to carry on? We've got a lot out there already. But okay, let's do a little bit more. Give us a run through of their previous.
Okay. So Moneyweek do have a bit of previous, particularly their editor. She is very anti-property. So let's go back to 2009, which is possibly the best time to buy property in the last 20 years. And this is mirroring Somerset Webb and their editor. In 2009, she said, I think prices are going to fall further over the next couple of years. If you have a deposit and want to buy but can afford to wait, you probably should. That would have cost people if they listened to that advice in 2009. In 2010, she wrote an article saying she was reluctantly buying in Edinburgh after previously telling people it was better to rent. I suppose she had to justify what she was doing. She went on to say, though, that it was the worst ever financial decision she's ever made. That's what she said. Property prices have increased in Edinburgh since 2010. So I hope my worst investments are that bad. In 2010, in the FT, she wrote, house prices should rise, but they won't. She also said that in 2010. And in 2011, in Moneyweek, she said house prices are grotesquely too high and now isn't the best time in the world to make a large consumption purchase. All we need now is for prices to fall in recognition of that new reality. Again, property prices have gone up since then. So if you listen to her in 2009, 2010, 2011, and pretty much every year since, you would have cost yourself a fortune. I think, Rob, people probably get the idea.
I think so. I must confess at this point, I love Merrin, but I'm very glad I haven't taken her advice on housing because, yeah, consistently very wrong at a time when if you had bought, you would have done extremely well. And this isn't about picking on particular people or particular publications. I don't think that we've sounded like we have. We certainly weren't intending to. But it's a general point that you should be very cautious with who you take advice from. And indeed, you should be very cautious about taking advice from anyone. Everyone's got some kind of angle. Everyone's got some kind of opinion. Everyone's got some kind of bias. With some people, the bias is obvious. They're trying to sell you something. They've got a vested interest. But even if they're not, they're still going to have some kind of bias. So it's a really bad idea to read one magazine article and let it shape your worldview too much. It's even, believe it or not, a bad idea to just listen to us and take what we say as gospel. You should expose yourself to as many points of view as you can and then do the thinking for yourself. It's the hardest thing to do. It's far easier to just see something in a magazine and go, oh, yeah, better do that. But no, do your own thinking. Come to your own conclusions. The truth is generally somewhere in the middle of everything that you hear. So just work it out for yourself. And then even if it goes wrong and you make the wrong call, at least you can't feel too hard done by because you've only got yourself to blame. You can't claim that you've been misled.
Yeah, Moneyweek isn't the only guilty party for writing sensational headlines. Look at our podcast title. But it's the same with most of the papers, most magazines related to finance. If they just said everything's normal, not much to report, you're not going to sell a lot. So they're forced to be sensational. And that's what they've done here. But unfortunately, as Rob said, many people will read a headline and make decisions based on a headline, or read what looks like a well-constructed article and be terrified. But that's the problem. Most people will write or broadcast information that supports their worldview. And as Rob's rightly said, we try to be as balanced as we can, but you need to look at what we say and do and question everything and come to a balanced view, because I want to echo exactly what Rob said. It's normally somewhere in the middle, but the middle doesn't sell magazines or papers.
Okay, so there you go. Are we on the verge of the next property crash? Well, anyone familiar with Betteridge's law of headlines? If any headline ends in a question, the answer to it is no. Our opinion is no, we're not on the verge of the next property crash. There will be a property crash at some point. Of course there will. We know there will. But are we on the verge of it? Seems not to us, but form your own conclusion. And let us know what you think. Love to hear your thoughts on this. Get over to thepropertyhub.net. Get on the forum there. You can share your views and debate this topic with other listeners. So coming up, our resource of the week, and we'll let you know what's coming up next week. But first, we must thank a very kind listener who's left us a review.
We should, and thank you to Boa B for cheering us up with this lovely review. Fantastic podcast full of both topical and relevant content for anyone involved or looking to get involved in property. Was in morning when I managed to get through all the historic episodes and look forward to enthusiasm with my weekly fix of the property podcast. It has encouraged me to do a couple of flips and a buy-to-let in the last 6 months. Long may it continue. Please don't stop. Many thanks for your words of professionalism and encouragement. Well, we won't stop. I promise you the Gold and Stocks podcast will not be next week. We will be back with the property podcast. But before then, we've got to give you a resource.
Yeah, and this looks like a nice geeky one. So this is a Chrome extension. So we've talked about some of these before. Chrome is a browser like Firefox or Internet Explorer or anything like that. The great thing about Chrome is people can build all these add-ons for it that give it cool extra functionality. And this one that you've identified, Rob, is just one of those, and it's called the Great Suspender.
So it is a bit geeky, so apologies in advance, but I love it. So Chrome, every time you open a tab up, it takes energy from your computer. So if you're on a laptop and you're not plugged into the power device, that takes up more battery. And it also slows your computer down, which is a shame because Chrome is such a fantastic platform for surfing the web and doing all sorts of bits and pieces because of these extensions. So what the Great Suspender does is it will suspend a tab that you have open that you haven't touched for an hour. And you can change the time you want. Mine's set to an hour. And then when I go back to that tab, I just click it to refresh it to where it was before. So it saves battery life on my Mac, and it means it just runs that little bit faster too. It's free. Why not use it? If you use Chrome, it's well worth getting. Check it out. It'll be in the show notes this week. And I think this is one of these episodes where you definitely need to get to the show notes. It's thepropertyhub.net/crash time. That's thepropertyhub.net/crash time. So, Rob, after a sensational headline this week, we certainly aren't going to do what Moneyweek have done and be sensational next week. What have we got?
We've got an episode called How to Become a Property Millionaire in 10 Years.
Oh, well, maybe a little sensational, but we promise it will have plenty of reasonable content in there. And remember, we did say 10 years, not 10 months. So make sure you join us for that for next week. Property investment is one of those things that if you do it well and do it right, you can become wealthy over the long term. Many people will tell you you can become rich quickly. You might be able to, but the chances are unlikely. But you can become wealthy in the long term if you do it right. So next week, we're going to teach you how to do it right.
Yes, we are. So before then, get over to thepropertyhub.net/crash time to see all the links for this week and to join in the conversation. We will see you on Tuesday for another episode of Ask Rob and Rob. Until then, happy voting. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to The Property Podcast. For show notes, all our past episodes, and to leave a review, go to thepropertyhub.net/podcast.